Okay, well, we are live. Brendan, tell us what's coming up.
We are. I didn't hear the intro this time. I don't know what's happening on my side. I never get to hear that little intro. But anyway, Ollie, coming up tonight on Colombia's only live and interactive English language chat show, we're going to be chatting about Colombian communication. That is to say, quirky sayings and some uniquely Colombian uses of Spanish words. And from an English perspective, we'll look at a few Spanish words and phrases that don't have the meaning that we may initially think they do. False friends, as they're called. Not only that, but we'll also explore the fascinating world of Colombian gestures. And no, I'm not just randomly stroking my very much unkempt beard. I'm telling you, there's a thief about. We'll explain more about that later. Now, no doubt you've plenty to add to all this, so let us know your favorite Colombian saying, hand gesture, whatever it is. Write to us on the Facebook comment facility. Or if you're not watching us live, as I do know that many of you watch it pre-recorded, get in touch via Twitter with the handle @BogotáPost, or simply write us a message on Facebook. But first, as we always do, we take a look at some of the major developments over the last week here in Bogotá and Colombia in general. Shortly, we'll be discussing some new measures introduced over the last few days as Colombia continues to come to terms with its coronavirus new normal. There's also bankrupt Avianca's payment of over $5 million to two top executives, and James Rodriguez finding of his mojo on Merseyside. First, though, Ollie, I don't think I'm too far off the mark to say that there was apprehension in some quarters ahead of last Monday's planned protests, especially considering the violent scenes we saw 2 weeks ago. In the end, from my perch here in the far, far north of Bogotá, they were relatively peaceful. You, though, were closer to the action. A tame affair or not?
Well, not as much as we would have thought about. Obviously, a couple of weeks ago, we had major clashes between the police and sort of spontaneous protesters. That wasn't what was happening on Monday. However, as is pretty much traditional, after a protest has been running for a while, gets to about 4 or 5 o'clock, you can pretty much bank on there being tear gas, regardless of what happens. And yet again, that was what we saw on Monday night. So by about 7, 8 o'clock, I had tear gas drifting in through the windows of my house. Not particularly pleasant for the dogs. I'm sure it wasn't pleasant for the protesters either.
And of course, then the following day, we had this ruling from the Supreme Court that, reading between a lot of the lines, and there's a lot of toing and froing in terms of what's going to happen after this ruling, but it almost looks like they're calling for the end of Esmad, the riot police, because they can't control in a peaceful manner these protests. What do you make of all of that?
I mean, I doubt that will happen. If it does happen, I mean, obviously, here in Colombia, we've seen DAS dismantled and, new organizations pop up in its aftermath. That's likely what would happen with the Esmad. I mean, one way or another, every police force pretty much everywhere in the world needs a heavily tooled up section of the force to deal with events like this. I think it's fair to say there's a lot of complaints about how Esmad operates, and what's much more likely is that we might see better guidelines and maybe some changes to operational procedure. How much of that actually takes place is really the key, though. Colombia's got a real habit of writing things down on paper and writing fancy laws and fancy rules and making fancy statements. What happens in reality often bears little or no relation to that.
Yeah, interesting. Will this be different? Yeah, well, who knows? Because about writing things down, a couple of things that spring to mind on that. Number one, their constitution is a lengthy document to get through. So there's a lot of laws and it covers a lot of eventualities. But of course, it can be open to a whole host of interpretations. And another area where this writing down a lot was with the peace agreement. I remember an Irish diplomat saying to me, look, Brendan, this is a very thorough affair. It's run to whatever it was, 300 pages. And I couldn't help but think, and he said in comparison to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement for Northern Ireland, which was a much shorter document, I couldn't help but thinking, yeah, but that's kind of typical here. They'll have it'll be open to a whole host of interpretation because it's so long. And also it could be, and this is something we're going to talk about in the second half of the show, communication here. Sometimes they say the same thing about 500 times over, that in English we only need one way to say it. But that's another issue.
At the risk of being hypocritical, yes, breve is a word that doesn't seem to get used much in Colombian Spanish.
Exactly, Ali. But, well, that aside, and I know in that Supreme Court ruling, the Minister for Justice, Carlos Trujillo Holmes, or if I'm getting his name correct, but he had to issue an apology in 48 hours. Some very strange things in that. But we did see, obviously, one of the reasons for the protests was a backlash to this police violence. And they've carried on from last year's protest, which
I was about to say, let's be careful not to conflate those two things. The 21st of September protests were planned before the Kai burning kicked off. So they're not actually really the same thing. And although, of course, some of those issues do carry across, I think very much the profile of protester we saw on Monday is no means the same as the profile of protesters that we saw 2 or 3 weeks ago in the anti-police incidents. And I do think that's important to remember. What we saw on Monday was the professional protesters that we regularly see in Bogotá that turn out for all the marches under the sun. What we didn't see, and we had seen in parts of the November protests, we didn't see on Monday a great deal of regular folk getting involved. And that's problematic, I think, for the protesters' cause.
Well, so you think there might be a little bit of tiredness creeping in, that there was a lot of, would say, regular support last year, whereas now they have other issues to concern themselves with in terms of where their next peso is coming from, even though that these protests are trying to tackle that issue as well.
Of course.
People are probably going, oh, what's the point? I'll just focus on my own little patch.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know what the reasons for that would be. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of focus on the deaths of a couple of weeks ago. That was a key talking point in the protests. But the people who were killed, the people who were killed and the people who were protesting and the people who were attacking the Kai, they weren't there. They were conspicuous in many ways, I think, by their absence. Yes, of course, there is some crossover between those two groups, but that kind of mass popular sort of howl of rage, that was absent for sure on Monday.
There's one thing that came into my mind, Ollie. I don't know if you agree with this. The case now that the presidential term is limited to just one and it's 4 years, is there any incentive for Duque to kind of really push this? That even if he said, okay, we do need to reform Esmad, police, whatever, he's more than halfway through his term. He's going to be defined by coronavirus, no matter what he does. So he's got to kind of get that one right. Well, you reckon that we're going to be talking about this probably still at least 9 months' time. So this kind of, well, not on my watch. As a conservative president, will he bother to really make it a priority? I mean,
obviously, as far as I'm aware, I don't really know about Ireland, but it's always been kind of weird to me, this idea that, you have to limit people to a certain amount of time in political control. And I do think one of the big problems with it is exactly as you mentioned, Duque's got no incentive to do a good job. He does a good job, he does a bad job, he loses his job anyway. So, yeah, what's the point? Unless he thinks that a legacy will be built from it, and as you say, that's unlikely anyway. So, yeah, I mean, does he have... I think what's getting really dangerous, to be honest, Brendan, and what worries me far more, is that we're seeing more and more that the police can just ignore quite serious issues. And that's really worrying to me, that if we're talking about the deaths of, 11, 13 people, there's a bit of confusion there about exactly how some of those deaths took place still. but nonetheless, a number of people dead, police stations burned across the city, and it seems he can just ride it out. There doesn't seem to be a big popular wave of discontent. People seem that they can tolerate the levels of violence we're seeing. I think it's very worrying that he just seems to be able to ignore a lot of this and keep on trucking.
Well, do you think he's listening to certain sectors of society and he's getting a different feedback that maybe we're getting? Because, well, I took kind of my weekly walk up to Codito again last night and walked by the Kai. Now, of course, Codito, Barrio Strato Dos, I guess, certainly not any higher than that. And a number of messages were posted on the Kai, stuck to the Kai, just saying, well done to the police, we need you, thanks for all your support and help to that effect. Yeah, which I thought was quite interesting for that part of town. So are we overstating the fact that there's uproar against the police?
Well, I mean, that's my point, that there just doesn't seem to be, does there? Neither against the police, neither against the army. I mean, do remember that I'm continually amazed at how small a deal nationally the falsos positivos was. I mean, I can't imagine something like that happening in many countries and simply being swept under the carpet in the way that it was here. And, we see this case today of Juliana in Cauca, where the army, and details are very hard to come by at this point. There's a lot of conflicting information according to different witnesses. So, I don't want to speak with too much authority before we have concrete details. Certainly it does appear that the army have fired upon a civilian vehicle. They've ended up killing a 38-year-old woman. And that's worrying. I mean, I don't think there's many situations in which the police or the army being responsible for the deaths of civilians, it's very hard to dress that up as being anything other than very problematic.
Yeah, as you said, details still very much unclear about what exactly happened there in Cauca, but very worrying. I actually was just on Blue Radio having a look, and there is a video, which of course you get with everything these days now, and it seems it was after the event, but it seems very worrying that there's unarmed civilians driving and whatever happened. But yeah, I guess we'll get more details in the coming day. Well, we hope we get more details.
Well, but again, this is the point. Duque has called in that case, for a castigo ejemplar, an example, making an example of the officer involved. But actually, I think that's really there's two problems here. One is that we all wonder if that's really going to happen. And secondly, it's not about making an example of one soldier. It's about changing this attitude that they seem to be very much happy to shoot first and ask questions later. And that's just not how state operatives are meant to go about their business.
Yeah, indeed. Well, I guess we'll have to see what happens in the next few weeks and months. Will there be actual proper actions taken and reforms taken? But Ali, I guess we'll move on. Other things have been happening, and just to invite people to send in comments if they've got anything to say on this. And later on, we'll also be talking about communication in Colombia in its various ways, be that verbal or non-verbal, different phrases, dar papaya, etc., etc. Ali there is pointing the way forward. So get in touch with us, guys, using the live comment facility. Or if you're watching this after the event, you can tweet us at Bogotá Post, and we will take your comments. Always like to hear some feedback. But COVID-19, coronavirus restrictions and measures, Bogotá opening up, Colombia opening up a little bit more as each week passes. People can go to the cinema now, Ollie.
Freedom! Yeah, no, nothing says freedom quite like that. I mean, the cinema, it has to be said, is a big step, remember. We're talking about an indoor environment. We're talking about a place where contagion, would be more likely. So it does show that the local government certainly are feeling a lot more relaxed, a lot more comfortable. They certainly think we're through the peak. That's got to be a positive, I think. The rules have been relaxed on bars and restaurants. Pico y Cedula is gone. That's a real headache. I mean, I have to say, today, leaving my house, and I was starting to fret, thinking, I don't have much time between classes. I've got to walk the dogs. I've got to do my shopping. Otherwise, it's going to have to be off till Saturday. And then I suddenly remembered, no, I can do my shopping tomorrow for the first time in months. Well, it's a little thing, Brendan, but it makes life so much easier,
No, exactly. To be honest, I regularly call into Centro Comercial Santa Fe up here in the north of the city, and they actually decided on their own that people could go into the shopping centre, because before they were keeping the Pico y Cedula, but before Claudia Lopez announced the end of it, I forget what day, it must have been Sunday, I went up with my cedula in hand. They go, no, you can go in. It just said certain shops.
Just for the shops.
Yeah. But now, of course, that's gone. Just in terms of the strict data on the cinemas and theatres, it's limited to 50 people. So I guess you'll be able to maintain your social distance and all that kind of stuff, and obviously wear your mask and everything that's required these days, which I guess people at this stage it's just the norm. You get on with it. Have you any gumption to go to the cinema, or is that your thing? I mean, I'm not a big cinema goer anyway.
I must have been to the cinema, I think, about twice in the 8 years I've been living in Colombia. Neither of which were particularly edifying. No, that's not fair, actually. I went to see Colombia, Magia Salvaje. That was pretty good. And I've been to the art cinema a few times, to be fair, but and a few other little things. The Bicycle Film Festival. Okay, maybe I've been to the cinema, 10, 20 times. But yes, I'm not a regular cinema guy. Certainly not for the not for the kind of mainstream stuff. For sure.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see will the prices go up or whatever now that obviously they can only have not even probably less than 50% capacity, because I was going to mention Royal Films down your neck of the woods in Centro Comercial San Martin. I used to like to go there because the prices on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, you could get a ticket for 5,000 pesos. So the last time I went to the cinema was to see Freddie Mercury, that biography, which was pretty decent. A biopic, is that what they call it? Yeah, and there, like 5,000 pesos, you can't go wrong for a ticket. In that.
I'm going to raise you on that one. I remember the old Cinemateca Distrital just by the Gaitan Theatre, kind of off to the side. I remember paying less than 5 mil for 2 tickets to go and see a documentary about West Berlin music scene. Yeah, no, those were good days. That's for sure.
Yeah, well, it didn't sound that exciting. Maybe they were giving away the tickets. I'm sure it was a good documentary.
It was wonderful.
Just some other things, though, as well.
Visas
on the COVID. Because some important developments there and things that people need to be aware of, because it could affect the legality of their stay here now. You have more details, yeah?
Kind of. It turns out that, I mean, there are things that aren't clear. I mean, a big one there really on not being clear is no one really knows what's happening with Diane. And that's quite a big issue kind of hanging over. Basically have a lot of people who have been trapped in the country suddenly become tax residents. Because that's going to put the cat among the pigeons for a few people, or indeed the partridge among the pigeons, we could say. Looking at visas themselves, basically, you've got, if you're currently on a visa, sort it out. If you can't sort it out quickly, you've got a month in which to apply for a salvoconducto. Once you have the salvoconducto, you've got as long as that salvoconducto permits in order to sort yourself out your new visa. Now, salvoconductos, they're normally a month long, although it does vary depending on circumstance. It's basically a little extra sort of grace period that the Colombian government gives you in order to get your stuff done so that you don't, mess up a visa or lose an application. Should be fairly straightforward to get one of those, but then again, there have been massive delays at the visa office, which I think you're very much aware of, and I'm sure you'll tell us in due course. For those of you who are on what they call a tourist visa, it's a little bugbear of mine. Very few people are here actually on tourist visas. They're almost always on permisos de ingreso, and that just means basically it's the visa at arrival that you get when you enter. Now, that's been frozen for a long time, so nobody's been in danger, nobody's going to get fined. However, you have a month from the 1st of October to get out. Pretty much by the time Halloween rocks around, you want to not be part of, you want to not be in Colombia or have a legal extension or have applied for a proper visa or whatever, or sorted yourself out. But that grace period is very much ending November the 1st.
Yeah, well, you said you have to get out, but they can, like if they get a salvoconducto in that time, which they could have a reason to stay or whatever, and maybe look for a visa. I would find it fascinating, though, tourists who are trapped here, because there's one thing about visa holders like myself that, I'm used to staying in the country, whatever. I mean, people had said to me, "Oh, do you miss not being in Ireland?" No, I prefer to be in Colombia for the quarantine, to be honest. But people who were here visiting and then they got trapped in a hostel, like, I'm sure they want to get out. I would have thought that the majority of them are already gone back on humanitarian flights.
I mean, there were enough humanitarian flights, and there aren't that many tourists. I think the vast majority of them got cleared. The ones that didn't tended to be people who, some of them I think were like kind of false tourists. So you had a few people who were here on tourist visas but looking for work, looking to move towards a visitante visa. I think, most of the people who were sort of genuine tourists in genuine problems, they've all been cleared off. I think we should address this question we've got here. We've got a question from Wally Broderick here. He's asking, what should the role of us as immigrants be with this preposterous human rights situation in Colombia? Now, I find this very interesting. I mean, in the Bogotá Post, we're frequently writing about deaths of social leaders. Wally, by the way, is a contributor to the paper, and he's written himself about and I think very movingly, about the state of prisons in Colombia, which again, a lot of prisoners are kept in absolutely appalling conditions. I think it's very interesting. We try to strike a line of not over-criticizing Colombia, not taking massive bites out of it any time, but following the lead of local protest, local criticism, and try not to go too far. But it has to be said, whatever we write about any aspect of the peace deal, we frequently write about ex-guerrilla who are building new lives, and we will inevitably get a raft of comments accusing us. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I think we were left-wing hippie rag was one of them, or left-wing commie rag. We're regularly called snowflake liberals and the like. And by the same token, we get plenty of local criticism of people saying that we support Duque and we're helping to legitimize and enable this. I don't think it's an easy question to answer, Wally, and it's not something that I can answer in 2 minutes. What I would say, as a sort of brief summing up of it, I think it's very important for us to use the voice that we have that's slightly different, maybe to local voices, that we have a slightly more international reach. We can reach the places that some other media outlets can, and we try to use our voice in a kind of responsible and constructive way on that.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo that in many ways. So not to repeat what you've just said, but exactly, it's that reach that you, like yourself, the Bogotá Post, obviously it's English language, and whatever I write in El Tiempo or a podcast, that the reach will be different to an internal audience here. Well, whether they're listening or not is another thing. Like, one thing that kind of surprised me, because I'm from a country that obviously takes human rights quite seriously, and our embassies and diplomats are usually quite vociferous on these points. Ireland likes to kind of fight, the underdog and the country that has been oppressed and so forth. Irish media didn't really pick up at all on what happened here over the last few weeks in terms of protests and the deaths and things like that. So that kind of disappointed me in one sense. I kind of thought, like, if they're not mentioning that, what are they going to mention about Colombian media, or Colombia events in Colombia? But there you go. Anyway, Ollie, well, we'll wrap up on what the visas, and thanks again to Ollie for sending in that. And again, guys, do get in touch with us. And as I said, if you happen to be watching this not live, you can contact us via the Twitter handle at Bogotá Post or on Bogotá. About
this, or about any communication issues that you've had in Colombia, whether in Spanish or English or physically.
Yes, all coming up. I won't go in. You'd mentioned about my own visa issues and existential crises here, but I won't go into that. That's for another day. I might have more news in a week's time. Hopefully I do something more positive. Where will we go to? Will we go to sport or to Avianca next, Ollie? I'm not sure.
Let's go to this Avianca thing. I mean, it's a disgrace, isn't it? I mean, I know we're a bit pressed for time, but I mean, look, I think the Avianca deal, it seems fairly good in terms of it on its own merits as a deal for the Colombian state. It's a lot of free money and interest. It's a fairly risk-free. Loan. However, and of course, it keeps a big, powerful company, a big employer, etc., moving. That's great. I mean, I don't think that. I think what's really problematic about the Avianca deal in general is how it looks compared to the absolute, and I'll be frank here, shit show that's on offer to small and medium-sized businesses. And I've been banging this drum right from the start of lockdown. There hasn't been support for small and medium businesses. And it's the giants, and it's the big chains, and it's the conglomerates that are doing absolutely fine in this. The Corrigans and the Exitos are absolutely swimming. And again, with Avianca, it's such a visible sign of this. To then be handing out millions of dollars to executives for failure, it doesn't look good.
Yeah, like, it's the optics of it. And what annoys me in these things, and it happens, it's not just Colombia, obviously, it happens all over the world. It's kind of, but it was mentioned in the contract and all this kind of stuff, so we're just following but it's like, so many ordinary people get screwed over left, right, and center. And I'll go on my rant, about asking for things for a visa, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. And then you see these hotshot executives getting astronomical sums, as you said, for failure. Okay, Anko van der Werf came in late in the day and he was kind of seen as the savior. And then along came coronavirus to wreck his hopes. You can't put all the blame on his door. But at the same time, I think any company could look, hey, an act of God just came along. We can't really pay you this 3 million plus salary.
No, like you say, it's nothing unusual by global business standards. I think we've got Frank Spitzer here mentioning that it's a similar situation with Lufthansa, and I'm sure it is the same all around the world. But that doesn't make it right. And in fact, that to me that's worse. The fact that we normalize this kind of thing is it's terrible. But anyway, on to sport. Disappointing finish to the Tour de France for Colombian riders. Egan Bernal ended up pulling out, as we had speculated might be the case. Good finish for your boys in green, literally. Sam Bennett there. And Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a something and nothing. I think if Colombia hadn't been in such a strong position in the second week, I don't think the third week would have felt nearly so bad. Um, but as it is, it feels like a bit of a what could have been moment. Egan was doing well before he pulled out. Lopez looked like he could hang with the leaders. And I think there's a really sour taste at the end of it with the news that Nairo Quintana and his brother, along with Wiener, were searched at their hotel on doping suspicions. Nothing's come of that. They've been released. It's not clear where that story is going. Let's not comment too much. Lots of it allegedly. Happier news for Colombians in Liverpool, though.
Well, yeah, can I just a quick one on the cycling though, Ollie?
Go on.
With our friend Egan. Any more news? Like that there was something more behind his withdrawing from the tournament, because when we did kind of say he was a sunshine cycler.
Yeah, so let's be very clear for anybody obviously who wasn't watching next week or isn't au fait with the situation. When we say is there anything more, Brendan's referring to injury and mentality. I know we were talking about potential doping earlier. That's not something that's been brought up in connection to Bernal. What has, although the conduct of the two Slovenian lads, one doing the podium, both using ketones, but that's for another day. Yeah, absolutely. Bernal, how serious is that injury? How much is it him just chipping off? I'd be inclined to believe that it's a serious injury by the fact that he retired with the yellow jersey on his shoulder as the defending champion. That's very unusual. Let's wait and see. Let's see how he goes in the off season. Let's see how he comes back in 2021.
Okay. And then, as you said, over to Merseyside. We're going to make our regular weekly visit to Merseyside in the James Rodriguez show. He got his first goal, and a fine goal it was. Pity there just wasn't a crowd there to see it. It was at Goodison, wasn't it?
Yeah. His home debut marked with a goal and a couple of assists. It looks like Dominic Calvert-Lewin likes having him to work with. I mean, Everton are looking, albeit they've not beaten the big sides yet, but they're looking positive. They're looking strong. So we've had a couple more comments. Thank you very much, Wally. Thank you very much, Adrian Marino Prieto.
Wonderful pronunciation there, right? I like it. I was just going to say, though, about James, just to wrap that up. Of course, the domestic football is going to take a break in a couple of weeks or less, in 10 days. So James will be in Barranquilla. How he'll cope with the heat in Barranquilla after Merseyside, I'm not sure. We'll have to watch that one. We'll be watching it keenly.
You're always criticising Liverpool, yeah? Why is it always us? No, it'll be a shock for him. But I think the bigger thing there, Brendan, and I know you're a big fan of the old Vino Tinto, the team, not the drink. Will it be yet again Colombia's traditional loss to Venezuela?
Or certainly not a loss, perhaps, but they're expected to win, and it's usually like a draw at the most. But yeah, they've lost a couple of games well against them. It's funny, like Venezuela always raised their game for Colombia. It's a bit like when the Republic of Ireland plays England, and England generally have much better players in terms of profile anyway, at least, but better players individually. But the Republic of Ireland generally raise their game, so we could be 100 in the world, but we play England and we generally get a result. And it's kind of the same with Venezuela. But the only thing is, to kind of rate Venezuela as also rans, they're very good footballers. The problem is the disorganization in the country itself. So how they get together collectively, I don't know how it pans out. Because didn't they get to the final of the under-21 or under-20 World Cup and lost to your guys? So there's talent oozing through there in Venezuela.
Oh, they're a tasty lot, the Venezuelans. But let's move on. Yes. Wally, by the way, who did comment earlier, you might want to read his comment on Facebook on our website. He's mentioning the launch of Polar Pass, which is a collaborative beer to raise funds for schools and cultural centres for kids in the reincorporación zonas. That's where the ex-guerrilla are being brought back into society. He's going to be on Facebook Live himself, 5:30 tomorrow. Check out the La Roja Cerveza Artesanal social networks. La Roja Cerveza Artesanal, for those of you who don't know, is a craft beer made by former guerrilla members trying to find their way back in society. But let's move on into our main discussion now, Brendan, which is basically communicating in Colombia. And any of you, write in with your comments, please. We're really interested to find out what kind of issues you have with communicating in Colombia, what Colombianadas and Colombianisms you particularly like or you've taken to your heart, and anything that's always struck you as a bit odd or a bit confusing or you've had problems with. We're really desperate to find out, what your experiences have been like. So, Brendan, over to you. I mean, obviously,
I'm smirking, to be honest, because I see Adrian just wrote in a comment and said he's got a problem with his keyboard. The message does look a bit funny.
It's somewhat opposite, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I turn to my notes.
I'm assuming, Brendan, that you've grown up obviously speaking English, and I suppose you must have learned Gaelic as well at school.
Oh yeah, from 4 years of age, ran down my throat.
And I've learned Japanese when I lived in Japan, of course, French and German at school as well. But of course, now Colombia is definitely the country in which I've gone the deepest with a foreign language, in that I've done all these weird things like navigating contracts at work and outside of work. I know you used to work in a completely Spanish language office, as do I, more or less. I have a few colleagues who speak English, but generally speaking, I'm always in Spanish outside of the classroom. What do you find when you're here? What are your favorite kind of Colombian words?
Well, the favorite ones. I was going to start off with one that kind of rankled with me from the start, like I did last week when we discussed different issues in relation to how Colombian behavior might annoy us. But at times, the no dar papaya thing, which... so the dar papaya, basically give papaya the fruit. Now, I'd never heard of papaya, to be honest, before I came to Colombia. I love it. It's part of my avena caliente in la mañana. I put papaya in that. I love papaya fruit. But dar papaya, as in allowing thieves to nick things from you and things like that. So you're showing them you're giving away too much. It annoys me because it's like putting the responsibility on you, or it's your fault.
It's victim blaming, yeah.
Yeah, and it does annoy me at times. Obviously, you've got to be careful here. You don't be flash with things, or in public transport, kind of nonchalantly using your phone and then putting it in a pocket where it's easily visible. Things like that. You have to be streetwise, but at times people have incidents here, and it's not really their own fault. You have to look.
No, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I've gone anywhere in the world where I'm going around, waving my wallet in the air and ostentatiously showing off wealth. But, pretentious as I might be at times. But, I've always dar papaya is a nightmare, isn't it? I remember being at a house party once, years ago, and I said, okay, time to be going, so, I'll call a taxi, and this, no, taking a taxi at this hour, that'll be dar papaya. And I said, all right, you think so? Okay, well, maybe I'll jump in a bus. No, that's definitely giving papaya. All right, well, I guess I'll walk back. No, that's definitely giving papaya. And I'm like, well, what am I meant to do then? I can't teleport home, can I? You're not offering me a sofa to sleep on, so I've got to get home somehow. Yeah, no, not ideal.
By the way, when you were at that party, did you wake up the next morning in Guayabo, Ali?
I did indeed.
Yeah.
No,
So,
I did indeed. And
guajabo, not to be confused with guajaba, another fruit. So, what on earth, if people are listening in and don't know, what does guajabo mean?
well, it doesn't make any sense, does it? Just like daha papaya doesn't obviously make any sense. You have to have it explained to you. And yeah, I mean, I think it's wonderful. And that's got me into trouble when I've been in other Latin American countries. When I visit, literally after 2 years in Colombia, when I visited Chile, I spent about 10 minutes in the morning talking at cross purposes in a hotel. Tengo guajabo, and they're like, what? What are you talking about? Like, there's no fruit here. What are you talking about? And I was like, and I said, when you wake up in the morning and you're feeling ill because you had too much alcohol in it, resaca. And I literally had never heard the word resaca in 2 years in Colombia, despite frequently having hangovers because of the altitude. Because of the altitude.
Of course, obviously, yeah. Well, I don't understand this word hangover anyway. As a teetotaler, never had to experience it. I know we're getting a few comments in there, quick and fast, on issues that we were talking about earlier in our review of the news, in terms of kind of the social issues of the day and rights for individual rights and things like that. Ollie, you're having a look at them, but just again, if people want to share their experiences, what we're talking about, Colombian saying, Colombianades, we're also going to be the first person in to tell us what this means, if they can see that. Talk about some of the Colombian gestures. We're going to be doing that. Yeah.
We're running low on time, Brendan. Come on.
Yeah, I know. We could go on here all night. Sumer said, I was just going to say. Sumer said, Ollie.
Sumer said.
Colombian one, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not really Colombian though, is it? I mean, it's very much from this region or from up in the hills in Boyacá, in Cundinamarca sometimes. I mean, yeah, I find Colombian sort of titling just really, really unusual. I can't get my head around. Colombian titling. In the last couple of weeks, we've been sorting out in the university elections for teachers' representatives. So, of course, I'm getting email after email, Doctor Oliver, El Maestro. And I think, these guys can't ever have met me. I don't think anybody that would have ever spoken to me face to face would be calling me a doctor, but it's just absolutely bizarre. And I'm tickled pink, I have to say. I find it very funny. I also think there's a very dark side to it, though. And I don't, I have a little chuckle. I think it's funny on email. It irritates me in person. And I do make a point of saying I prefer to be addressed by my first name. I don't have airs and graces. I am pretentious, but I don't have airs and graces about social standing. And I do take objection at times with the people that insist on being called doctor for no good reason, when it's not their. In my experience, people with PhDs very rarely insist on being called doctor.
Yeah, but the thing is, titles here are followed a lot. For example, children will call their mom and dad like senora, very formal to us. So we're kind of going, God, that's a bit like over the top. What are they doing that for?
And it's never in the middle, is it? It's either mammy or senora.
Yeah. It's that kind of, as you said, there's no middle ground there. And then, of course, there's the other ridiculous. Well, okay, not ridiculous. It's not ridiculous, but it's just weird to us, where they call their child like papi or mammy or whatever. So, as you said the other day, the complete opposite of what the relationship is. So it's rather
absolutely. Nothing weirder than seeing a mother talking to her tiny child, 2, 3, 4 years old, mammy. I'm thinking that's exactly the inverse of your relationship. It's insane. And again, I would say I find it really odd calling your boyfriends and girlfriends little mummy and little daddy, mamacita and papacito. That speaks a lot to some sort of father and mother issues that people have, I feel.
Again, as I said, maybe you shouldn't read too much into it. I know. Ollie, you're keeping an eye on some of the comments coming in there. I know some of them are referring to what we were talking about earlier, as I mentioned. But Wally does say about the guajaba, the fruit, being a very good cure for guajabo. I know what another cure for a guajabo is, and that's another pokeron or whatever your typical choice is. Usually does the trick. But anyway, we'll leave that. Well, of course, I don't. I've heard that as somebody who doesn't drink. I've heard that.
I've heard that, yeah. I've heard that, yeah.
We might as well just some of those hand signal things, which I've always found fascinating. So I used to get this a lot. Of course, it's not a reflection of reality. I am not Tacano. I'm living what I say. I'm living within my means. I can't spend what I don't have. But yeah, so that basically means somebody who's tight-fisted, parsimonious, frugal, whatever you want to call it. And then I mentioned this one in the introduction. So yeah, the kind of ladron. There's a thief about. It's kind of Bobo, isn't it? Yeah, whatever. It's silly.
Yeah, no. I've always liked that one, the old bad situation. Yeah, like that's things going bad. Very dramatic, I think, really sums things up. And of course the handshakes. We've all been here for long enough. I find it genuinely quite hard sometimes when I go back home and people want to shake my hand, because I'm naturally slipping the hand back out for the fist bump. The old.
Of course, you can't really do that now. Well, now it's kind of the elbow, and people have got more confidence up now. They're doing the kind of fist pump thing and touching.
I've seen that,
yeah. So because the COVID kind of, we'll say, they're not as stressed out about passing on COVID, I guess. So they're now easing out in terms of the greetings and things like that. Any other? I don't think there's any other real kind of common signal things. But again, as you mentioned at the start as well, the pointing with
pointing with your lips. I mean, that happens around the Caribbean, really, but it's very popular, of course, in Colombia. Thinking about other Colombianisms, coming back to sort of spoken language, I'm a really big fan of regalos, and that's a problem, I think, when you get. I think there's a big difference going to a bar as a foreigner and saying, "Regálame una," whatever it'll be, pokeron or whatever. There's a big difference, I think, to that and quiero, blah, blah, blah. I think it kind of shows that you're kind of a little bit, not local by any means, but that you're maybe not exactly a tourist. But it does get you into problems in other countries. Again,
exactly. If you're in Madrid or wherever, I guess in any other country in South America, it's not something they use, is it? The me regalas and Vesi, of course, for vecino, vecina. So you always have that.
Here we go. Wally says knocking on the head means drugs for sale. I assume he means knocking on their head. I assume it's not knocking on somebody else's head. That would seem a little on the violent side.
I have a tendency to scratch my head a lot. I was wondering why a lot of people in the barrier were coming up to me asking had I got something. Well, now it all makes sense. Thanks for that, Wally. I'll have to be careful.
Do you dry your trainers on the power lines as well?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting one. Slightly off topic, but I heard, and I don't know if there's any truth to this. You'll probably be able to give more light on the subject. But that's an area where people will sell drugs. Is that true or not? Yeah.
Well, that's the urban myth. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird one anyway. Why on earth? And some of them are good shoes as well. Hey, I could get those and sell them. They're in decent nick.
In many ways, that's the real quiz. Can you get your trainers on the power line? I can't imagine it's easy.
Yeah, it'd be a bit of a challenge. I guess you have to them tied together, and practice makes perfect if you do it enough times. People have a lot of time on their side, I guess. I guess we'll quickly move on to the false friends. I mean, we could be here all night talking about false friends. But a couple of them that come up in kind of everyday situations, like, you do teach classes, and I've taught classes here. Profe, I can't assist in class today, and they're thinking, of course, asistir in Espanol, but for us, I can't attend, but they wouldn't say attender. So that's one of those false friends.
And you want ayudar and ayudar instead. Yeah, no, that's a real pain. I don't think that one. At the end of the day, it doesn't cause too many problems. I'm also skeptical about how often embarazado comes up, but I think one of the ones that gets me is contestar for taking a phone call. I remember receiving messages that said things like, no voy a contestar eso. No voy a contestar eso esta noche, es por la mañana. And of course, now I go, okay, it just means it's too late to be receiving phone calls. But at first I was sitting there thinking, my God, they think there's an argument? What's going on? What are we contesting? Whereas, of course, had a very, very, very different meaning. And I do think the way Colombians sometimes use language is a bit confusing. Cancelar in restaurants. Again, I haven't seen that massively outside of Colombia. And I find that very weird. ¿Quieres cancelar? And I go, no, but
why?
We've eaten everything. What? How can we cancel after we've eaten?
Get out. But what would they use in other countries then, if not cancelar? Because the thing is, my Spanish is very much dictated by Colombian Spanish, because I didn't live in other countries long enough to know. Okay, I visited Venezuela most often in terms of other countries. So you've got chamo, and they say refresco for your kind of drink to accompany your meal or whatever. So those little subtle differences. But there's a lot of similarities too. But like compared to Chile and Argentina, I'd probably be completely lost if I went down there in terms of the language.
Chile is a nightmare. Yeah, my grandmother lived in Chile for a long time, and she still says she speaks Chileno, not Spanish.
Are they a bit arrogant about it then?
No, just that there's a lot of dialects, and the men especially are often very heavily accented, just like listening to a low bass rumble, bit like a small earthquake.
By the way, Oliver, I'll have to give you your, because I see it is Oliver, not Ollie, your number one fan just wrote in, Carolina Rubio. There you go. If we had prizes, you could probably give her one. We don't. Because you just said Oliver. Thanks for that, Carolina. We know who your favorite is.
Not maybe the most helpful comment. What about this for a classic Colombianism, which you won't find outside of the country? Arrunchar and arrunches.
Oh, yes, the little arrunches, yeah. Which, well, I was going to say, I won't be doing that tonight. I have no one to do it with it. But anyway, you can do it with your dogs.
I've always, yes, and I do it with my dogs. And I want to coin a new word, and I'm gonna go live now. I'm going to mainstream this word to the few people who are watching. Here's my new word, perrunche. And it comes from perra and arrunche together to make perrunche, cuddling up with your dogs. Yeah. Paula Andrea Perez Rubiano here saying her students always have problems actually and currently. Not only currently, by the way, Paula, I often find that telling students to translate actually if they look for at the moment instead, it helps them think of en este momente, which kind of breaks the cycle of wanting to use actually, and it kind of helps them out rather than using another adverb, which sometimes can exacerbate the problem. But absolutely, actual, a good example there is, a student might say something like, you might want to say something like, well, Uribe is the actual president. He's the power behind the throne. But of course, Duque is the current president.
Yeah. Well, I was actually thinking of that from a Spanish perspective today, I was just writing something, mi solicitud actual in Spanish, my current application that's in La Cancelleria. Have I mentioned that I have a visa?
Are you saying that that's your actual application? I thought it was a joke.
Yeah, I'm actually.
We certainly seem to be getting a punchline every week.
Well, indeed, but yeah, I have a serious one to send in next week, so we'll see how that one goes along.
Talking off work visas, Brendan, I guess we're at that time in the night. Next week, we want to be talking about the world of work. So, of course, there are plenty of people that do come over here to teach, and that's probably the biggest individual cohort of English-speaking foreign workers in Colombia. But there are, of course, many more people working in restaurants, working in PR companies. There's the Bitcoin digital nomad crowd out in Medellin. So we want to hear your stories about working in Colombia.
Yeah, the kind of the crazier, the better in a sense. Because as I said, yeah, like as you mentioned, Ollie, we think a lot of people, and maybe it's a reflection of the world that we live in, but a lot of people involved in teaching or maybe journalism even as well. But yeah, different kind of jobs that people get involved in here in Colombia. Okay, Ollie's got something to sell me. There we go. I think we're pretty much at the time, are we? Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're time to wrap up. So. Yeah, next week, that's what it'll be. Trials and tribulations of working in a Colombian office, fun opportunities that you might not have in your home country. Drop us a line, tweet us, etc. Just realized I haven't been looking at Twitter all day.
Yeah, that's your job.
So,
excellent.
It's goodbye and ciao, I suppose.
Good night, guys. Until next week.
Ciao, ciao. And we appear to still be live.